We've talked a lot about MVC, Model View Controller, which is one of the main design patterns used by Coldbox to build our web applications. Aspect-oriented programming, or AOP, is another useful pattern for building larger web apps. We get AOP functionality baked into our Coldbox apps automatically, and all you have to do to use it is uncomment a few lines of code. AOP is one of those concepts that often confuses developers that haven't used it before. It's not that scary, I promise. Really, all AOP programming does is when you have a function call, AOP gives you a way to make code automatically run before or after that original function call. For example, say you've got a method called saveReport. With AOP, anytime you call saveReport, you could have a function run first, maybe a method that makes sure the user is logged in and has permission so they're allowed to save new reports. Then the saveReport method would run, and perhaps afterward a third method would run, maybe a method that takes the newly created reports and emails them out to the company's management team, for example. Well, rather than having to look through every file in your app for anywhere saveReport is called and adding these two methods before and after it, you can simply use AOP notation to tell Coldbox, hey, anytime this saveReport method runs, first I want you to run this other method that checks security levels, then run saveReport, then after it's finished, run a method that emails those reports out to management. In a typical Coldbox app, the default way we would use AOP is in our handlers. We'll show you some examples of that now. Here's a diagram showing what an event handler would look like in a typical Coldbox app. You've got your users.list, similar to what we've been using in our code demo so far, and we have our list handler here. We've got some code in our handlers running functions called pre-list, pre-handler, post-list, and post-handler. List is our handler action, the same code that we've been using in the earlier demos. I've got pre-list, which is a method that would run right before list would run. Post-list is a method that will automatically run right after list would run. So that all I have to do in my code is if I run the users.list handler like we've seen before, I don't have to do anything except make sure a pre-list method exists inside my users.cfc file. Coldbox will take care of the rest. Anytime I say users.list, it'll run pre-list first, then it will run list. Same thing with post-list. All I have to do is make sure I have a post-list method in my event handler, and Coldbox will take care of running that for us as well. It'll do pre-list, then post-list for us. The reason it's called pre-list and post-list is list is the name of our handler action. So pre and then the name of the action, or post and then the name of the action. If I had a method called users.save, I could have interception methods in here called pre-save and post-save, and they would work the exact same way. So say I've got 10 different handlers in my user CFC file, and I want the same code to fire before all 10 of those, and the same code to fire after all 10 of those. Maybe all 10 events have to have code that runs first to make sure that the user is logged into the system. Well, I could have 10 pre whatever the function is called handlers and 10 post whatever function handlers. That would work, but we'd be repeating ourselves a lot. And remember the DRY principle of programming, don't repeat yourself. So instead of having 10 pre handler name handlers and 10 post handlers with that same convention, there's also these slightly more generic versions, pre-handler and post-handler. Handler is not the name of an action in our CFC. That's just the generic term for any of the handlers in that CFC file. So I can make a pre-handler, and that will run before any of the handlers in the CFC file. So again, if I've got 10 actions in the CFC, pre-handler would run before any of those 10, no matter which ones are called in our application, no matter what sequence they're called, no matter how often they're called. Pre-handler will run before all 10 of those. If I add an 11th action into my CFC, pre-handler will run automatically before that 11th one. Same thing with post-handler. 10 actions in my CFC, post-handler will run after all 10 of those have run in whatever sequence, no matter how often they're called in your app, whatever. If I have one handler that's called, say, 7 times in a row in some section of my app, pre-handler will run 7 times, once before each of those 7 executions. Post will run 7 times, once after each of those executions. You can actually combine both of these as well. I can have pre-handler and pre-list, post-list and post-handler. The way that works is, let's say we have our list action. Pre-handler will run first because that's the most generic of the interception methods. Then pre-list will run because that's more specific to this action. Then post-list will run, again because it's more specific to the action we're firing now. And then post-handler will run after all of that's done. So if I have all 4 of these purple methods in my CFC file, all I have to do is invoke the users.list action like we've done before, and all 5 of these will fire off in that exact sequence. The way you get that to work is simply here in your user CFC file. At the top of that file, you probably saw some code commented out that was created for us automatically when we did the Coldbox create app command earlier in the demos. It created these interception methods here for us: around handler, on missing action, on error. We'll get into these in a little bit. It also created these 2 that we have at the top here for us: pre-handler and post-handler. When they were first created, they were empty, looked like that. Notice they take event RC and PRC in just like our regular action methods do. They've got a couple of other parameters in here that we'll get into later. Notice in here, in my pre-handler method, I've got some code here that is just checking to see if a session variable is defined, and if it's not there, rather than actually running the list handler down below, we're simply going to output the user is not logged in and then abort the entire thing, so the user can't actually run code they're not supposed to run. If I go here to my browser, you can see that's actually functioning as we expect. If I go back here to my code and comment that out, save, and reload this page, we get the user list like we expect to have. Go back here and turn that code back on, and now we have a real simple check in our pre-handler interception method to make sure that the user is logged in before they access this part of the system. And all we had to do was add some code inside this pre-handler function for us. Notice how it's pre-handler, it's not pre-list. I'm using the generic one here that would run before any of the actions in this user CFC file. There's also an around handler. Rather than running just before or after a handler like the interception methods we just discussed, this one wraps itself around the handler entirely and gives you the ability to run code before and after the handler, all within the same function call. So while, yes, you could use this to basically do the same thing as pre-handler and post-handler, a more common scenario would be you'd use around handler to do things like wrap all your handlers in a try-catch block, for instance, because you can't do that in separate method calls. Perhaps you've got a brand new handler with several methods in it for a new functionality, and maybe the new functionality is prone to errors because it saves files to a network share, or because it talks to the APIs that are prone to crashing on some other server that you don't have control of. Well, you could write handlers in a simple fashion, and rather than each handler having its own try-catch block to try and deal with those problems, you could put one try-catch block in a round handler and use that interceptor for your entire handler CFC. Now you've got one try-catch block, and no matter how many crazy handler methods you've got in the CFC, they'll all have a try-catch block wrapped around them, giving you one spot to handle exceptions that get thrown in there. So that way, say I have maybe 10 actions in this user CFC file. If all 10 of those talk to different API servers, I might have 10 similar try-catch blocks that handle whatever exceptions come back from those APIs, and they log the errors from the API call to a log file. Maybe they send an email to someone on the IT team and so on. Instead of copy and pasting that same try-catch block across every single handler in my CFC, I could simply put that try-catch block in here in one spot and do something like try. And then this line arguments.targetAction, that's the line of code that will actually run the handler action that was called. So in the case of users.list, around handler would run, and when around handler gets to line 36, it would actually fire the list method down here, attempt to run it. If that method throws an exception of some sort, it would then run the catch command up here, and that's where we could do things like log the error to a log file in the system, email the IT team, and so on. Now I've got one spot to do that for all of my actions, as opposed to copy and pasting try-catch blocks across all the different actions in my CFC. Because we all know, when you copy and paste try-catch blocks across different functions in an app over and over again, everyone ends up doing this and adding empty try-catch blocks with no validation in the catch block whatsoever. That completely defeats the purpose of try-catch blocks. So if you have one to manage instead of 9 or 10 different ones in the file, you're much more likely to write a properly formatted try-catch block with actual validation in here and code to make your app more modern and secure. Yet another benefit you get just by using the interception methods in Coldbox. And again, all you have to do to make this work is uncomment the around handler interception method that's already in your CFC, and then just start using it. Now, above the implicit handlers in our CFC, we've got these lines of code that were also auto-generated for us. This.prehandler only, prehandler except, and so on. These are the optional handler properties. What these let you do is basically set up exceptions for the implicit methods we talked about below here. So prehandler will run before any action in this handler CFC. If I've got 20 handlers in here, prehandler will run before all 20 of those are fired. What if I have a case where I want this prehandler to run before 18 of those 20 methods? I don't want it to run before all 20 of them. Maybe the save method and the delete method are things I don't want the prehandler to fire before for some reason. Well, I can go up here to prehandler except, and I can simply name those methods, save, comma, delete. And now this prehandler will run for every method in my CFC except the ones that I've noted over here. What if I had the opposite case of that, where I'd have 20 handlers or 20 actions, and I want to list out explicitly only run before save and delete? I can say save, comma, delete. And now prehandler will only run when save and delete are fired, and the other 18, it will not run before those happen. Post handler works the same way. I can explicitly list out here, these are the methods in the CFC that I want our post handler to run before, after. I can also list out run after all of the actions except these ones. It works the same way as prehandler except does up here. And then around handler only and except works the exact same way for our around handler method that we talked about earlier. So you've got a lot of functionality here baked in automatically for you by ColdBox, and really all I have to do is uncomment some methods that were auto-generated for me and maybe add a couple of method names to these variables at the top of the file. When you change this stuff, remember to save and reload your ColdBox app for the changes to take effect. But once you do that, that's all you have to take care of. More information about the interceptor methods and their functionality is available in the OrdisBooks documentation at coldbox.ordisbooks.com. And remember, like the rest of ColdBox's advanced features, the interceptor methods are totally optional. If you'd only benefit from a prehandler, then just use one of those and ignore the other ones we talked about. Or leave them all commented out and skip them completely until you have a need for that functionality in your app. The interceptors won't do anything with your code unless you actually activate it and start using them. Otherwise, they sit completely dormant and don't bother your code at all.